Welcome to our final unit in the Science and Decision Making module. This one we're going to look at debates and decision making. So in our first unit, we established the importance of incorporating argumentation as an effective pedagogical approach in the classroom and considered some examples of scientific argument. So remember, we looked at the snowman, we looked at the way sound travels, how light travels. So they're all what we call scientific contexts. So we know there are two types of contexts for argumentation in science education literature. One, scientific. Okay, so scientific contexts for argumentation are concerned with the application of scientific reasoning to enable an understanding of the justification for hypotheses, the validity and limitations of scientific evidence, and the evaluation of competing models and theories. So we did a little bit of that in the scientific context. And that snowman example, the scenario was an example of a scientific argument. What we mean by that is that we're not invoking socio-scientific or moral, political, economic aspects to the actual argument. We're just looking at the scientific evidence as it stands and how that applies. So in a lot of ways, it's a good way to start with students because it sort of narrows down what they have to consider. Whereas the bulk of arguments in science concern socio-scientific issues within the public arena which invoke a consideration of a number of other factors. So socio-scientific contexts for argumentation are concerned with the application of scientific ideas and reasoning to an actual issue. And they also invoke a consideration of moral, ethical, and social concerns. So they're much more complex than our scientific ones, because although we're looking at scientific evidence and ideas, we also have to consider a number of other concerns. So they're complex social dilemmas based on applications of scientific principles and practice. We started to have a look at some of these in Module 3 when we looked at science and ethics. So a lot of decision making goes on there with these, we looked at the love canal and different scenarios. Also, the slides in Unit 2 on science in the media, those types of things that are reported tend to be heavily focused on socio-scientific issues. You're not about to see a media report about Fred and Bert the snowmen, so it's fairly uncontested knowledge and it doesn't have the so what factor. So as such, these socio-scientific issues provide an interesting context for engaging students in argumentation. So from that, I mean that students tend to be much more interested in these types of scenarios than they are in just the scientific ones, because really, again, it's the so what question. Although it can be novel and interesting to consider the snowmen, really students actually demand more relevance to the everyday experience. So we're going to look at a socio-scientific issue which is fairly prevalent in the media, and that is the increasing incidence of cancer. But before we do that, and as a teacher, I would always highlight the need to make sure, if it's in a science class, we need to make sure that the students have some fundamental background understanding, because you cannot engage in an argumentation or a debate about a topic if you have no understanding of the background science. If we want them to be scientifically literate, we need our students to have some fundamental ideas about what the actual science is behind the issue. So here's a little bit of background about cancer, and you'll probably find it interesting because we hear this term cancer all the time, but all we hear is the media view of cancer. We don't actually know the science behind it. So I thought I'd give just a snapshot, it's a very small snapshot, about what cancer actually is. So cancer is a group of more than 100 diseases, and it's the core of it is that it's characterized by uncontrolled cellular growth as a result of changes in the genetic information of cells. So cancer is uncontrollable cell growth. It's when the cells replicate at a much greater than average rate. So cells and tissues are complex systems with critical stages and checkpoints to ensure normal growth, development, and function. So our cells are always dividing and replicating. That's normal. Okay, so that happens, a lot particularly in when babies move through to toddlerhood and in adolescence, where there's a lot of growth. They're key times in a human's life where that process speeds up an awful lot. Obviously, with an unborn baby, the process is happening at a very fast rate. But even things like our skin cells, every day they're dividing, they're replicating to create new skin. Okay, so not only the division Differentiation, and what we mean by that is when the cells become particular kinds of cells. So remember when we talked about stem cells? Stem cells are largely undifferentiated cells. They're cells that haven't actually got an identity of what they are, a skin cell, a nerve cell, etc. So cells have to divide, they have to differentiate into their particular kind, and then they die. So there's a cycle, and that cycle is carefully regulated in normal non-cancerous cells. Okay, so that's what happens every day in every one of us. So all cancers begin, though, as a single cell that has lost control of its normal growth and replication process. All right, so when that system gets disrupted, that's when we have a problem. Okay, so human adults are made up of billions of cells, which are renewed and replaced constantly. About 5 to 10% of cancers result directly from inheriting genes associated with cancer, but the majority involve alterations or damage accumulated over time to the genetic material within cells. So something within the nucleus of the cell, so here's a bunch of individual cells forming a tissue. So within that nucleus, we have chromosomes, which contain genes, and somewhere in that process, because the genes give the instruction to the cell about what it needs to do. And what we're saying is that something happens in that genetic material, whether it's an environmental factor or a genetic factor, that disrupts that normal process. So here's our normal cells. Here's cells that have not gone through the process or a regulated process, and over time, this is a tumor. It's a bunch of cells that are abnormal. Okay, and these cancer cells then divide and redivide and divide again and multiply, and that's how the tumor eventually forms and grows. So that's a little bit of background for you. So really important and not too complex. This is really at that junior secondary level. It's very important for students to have some sense of what the actual topic is and the background behind it before they engage in any sort of discussion or debate. So the causes of damage to the cells are both endogenous, so internal, and exogenous, which are environmental. So you can think of things like skin cancer as an exogenous. Well, it can also be endo, but a lot of the time there's been many types of skin cancer linked to excess sun exposure. Each type of cancer has different characteristics, but one feature of all of these diseases is unregulated cell growth and/or cell death. So somewhere in the process, something's happening which is not regulated. It's not the normal growth pattern. Apart from cancers such as leukemias, this results in a tumor or a mass, and cancerous cells often invade the surrounding tissue. So what this means too is that if you have ever been unfortunate enough for yourself or with a family member or friend to experience cancer, a lot of the time you hear of people getting cancers cut out. So like the small skin cancers, for example. Now, they can be malignant or benign, and we'll talk about that next. But what often happens is, say, for example, I had a small skin cancer removed from my back, and what they do is they always take some extra tissue because they don't know how much the cancer may have invaded that surrounding tissue. So the spread of cancer cells from the primary site to the other parts of the body is called metastasis, and benign tumours do not spread, but malignant tumours are capable of invading other body tissues, and that's why it's so important to have those removed, because we know that they can eventually get into other tissues. So the causes of cancer. So a number of different types of exogenous or environmental factors are known to cause cancer. These include some aspects of food and nutrition that are established as carcinogenic by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, although it's difficult to estimate the proportion of cancers directly attributable to these. So here's some common ones. Tobacco smoking. So we know that, 30 years ago, the amount of deaths from lung cancer from tobacco smoking was very high. We're still seeing residual from that because that generation are in their late 80s, early 90s now. So many of them have been affected from smoking in their generation, not so much a big issue now. Infectious agents, so viruses, bacteria, certain medications, radiation or exposure to radiation, and that can include sun damage. industrial chemicals, and also carcinogenic agents in food and drinks. And you can see here estimated cancer deaths by site. So these are the types of cancers. So you see here 2012, still the vast majority of deaths from cancer are from lung cancer. So this is primarily related to tobacco smoke, also can be related to different types of asbestosis from industrial processes, but we can see that that is a very significant figure, and that has come through from the previous generation, who many of them did smoke, are now now elderly, and this is probably the largest cause of death. And you can see the other types here. So you may have seen in the media a number of different stories put forward about cures for cancer, possible ways to minimise cancers, risk factors, etc. But a recent one that's been in the media is this idea about energy restriction. And what that is that restriction of energy intake from foods has been found to be the most effective single intervention for preventing cancer in experimental animals. And what that means is things like rodents, mice, different types of rodents. And I think you're probably thinking now, oh, but we're not allowed to experiment on animals because we talked about it in one of the earlier modules. But it's important to realise that animals are experimented on. It's just a very controlled process, because if we didn't carry out any experimentation on living organisms, we would never have any idea about whether we can do things on humans. So some people sometimes find that quite disturbing. So what the research actually found was that restricting nutrition, so basically what it means is that not feeding animals, or restricting how many calories they consume, was found to increase the lifespan of rodents and suppress tumour development in mice. So what they actually found was they actually gave rodents cancers of different kinds to also see if it actually stopped the tumour from progressing, as well as increasing the lifespan. So energy restriction leads to a reduction in cell proliferation. So this may directly inhibit tumour growth. So what that means is it's slowing down that sort of unregulated, out of control cell division. So the data on energy restriction must be interpreted with caution, as all studies have been performed in experimental animals and there is an absence of data in humans. So that's an important thing to consider. So therefore, the relevance of these findings in experimental animals to the human condition is not yet clear. So let's have a look at this scenario. Researchers are just beginning to unravel the role of diet and nutrition in the development of cancer, or carcinogenesis. It is clear that carcinogenesis is a slow process, often taking 10 to 30 years. Diet may play an important role during the initiation of cancer, whereby certain foods may serve to increase detoxifying enzymes that help stop the initial stimulation and growth of the cancer cells. At the same time, other nutrients and foods, such as fat, may serve as promoters for already initiated cancer cells. Scientists have estimated that diet is responsible for 20 to 40% of all cancers, perhaps as high as 70%. Diets rich in fruits, vegetables and fibre have consistently been shown to have a beneficial effect on cancer. On the other hand, heavy consumption of red meats, saturated fats and salty foods have been linked to a variety of cancers. Other lifestyle factors related to nutrition also appear to be associated with cancer. Obesity has been linked to a variety of cancers, including endometrial, breast, colon and ovarian. Alcohol consumption has been linked to cancers of the digestive tract and liver. Conversely, several studies have supported the beneficial aspects of physical activity, which may reduce the risk of several types of cancer, including colon, breast and prostate. So here's an activity for you. After thinking about what cancer is, thinking about that new research that has started to look at a link between energy restriction or moderating what's being consumed in experimental animals but not in humans, and then the scenario. So here's the activity for you. So does an unhealthy diet lead to the development of cancer? So I'd like you to develop an argument to support or refute this claim based on everything we've talked about in this module. So we know how to structure an argument, we know what to look for in media reports, we know how to critically evaluate. So I'd like to see what you think based on that, and I'd really like for you to share your ideas on the discussion board. We're going to look at one more aspect before we finish and then have a look at our portfolio items. And we're going to change track and we're going to now look at climate change. So this is another really important socio-scientific issue. And we're going to have a quick look at an ICT with some background science, which I'll also summarise. So this ICT will actually has no sound, but we can see that the main structures there. We have the sun, the earth with the earth's atmosphere around it. So we're going to actually show the process. So our earth receives most of its energy called radiation from the sun. Now, we said before that light travels in straight lines, so the squiggly line could be baffling you right about now, but we're just indicating it's a form of radiation. We also have visible light, which is the light that we see, and this radiation also contains infrared and ultraviolet rays. Here's our atmosphere. Here comes the visible light, so in it comes. So the incoming visible solar energy has a very short wavelength and passes right through the atmosphere, unaffected by gases in the atmosphere. Okay, so we have the light coming in, it hits the ground or it hits a surface, and the Earth's surface absorbs the solar energy and then re-releases it back into the atmosphere as infrared radiation, some of which goes right back out into space. So some of it, so we have the light energy coming in, okay, it hits the ground, some of it goes straight back out, but some of it gets trapped. And remember now, this is infrared, so this is heat energy. Okay, but some of the infrared radiation emitted by the Earth is absorbed by what we call greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. Okay, so gas molecules that sit in this atmosphere absorb that infrared energy and then they send it back to the Earth's surface, and this is how the Earth's surface gets warmed. Okay, so now we're on the surface of the Earth. So three main gases in our atmosphere contribute to the greenhouse effect. So they're carbon dioxide, methane, and water. These gases absorb the infrared radiation emitted by the Earth and re-radiate the energy as heat back towards the Earth, causing a warming. Now this warming, the natural process, this process occurs naturally, as in the only reason we can live on Earth is because some of this re-radiation occurs. But the warming due to greenhouse gases is expected to increase as humans add more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. So you can see that if we add more and more of these greenhouse gases, they absorb more and more of this infrared and re-radiate it back. Let's summarize that. So the greenhouse effect is a natural process. It's a good process. Okay, we need it, by which heat is trapped in the lower levels of the Earth's atmosphere by greenhouse gases such as carbon dioxide, CFCs, methane, and water vapor. So you can think about an analogy to this as a gardener's greenhouse. So the light energy can easily pass through the glass, and when it strikes plants or any other objects, much of this energy is transformed into heat energy. And the lower energy heat rays cannot easily pass through the glass, so the heat is trapped, causing the temperature inside the greenhouse to rise. So that's very similar to what happens in our atmosphere. Okay, so the natural greenhouse effect slows the rate at which heat energy can radiate away from the Earth, leading to a warmer planet. So it's a necessary component for us to be able to live on the Earth. However, the enhanced greenhouse effect, which is caused by an increase in those greenhouse gases, results in even greater warmer by further slowing down the rate at which heat can escape. Global warming is the phenomenon that makes the surface of the Earth and the lower atmosphere hotter. The term climate change is the politically correct term to use to describe this phenomenon. So global warming now is a very loaded term. A lot of politicians particularly don't like it because it infers that we've decided that the atmosphere is warming, even though a lot of the evidence suggests that it is. So what we tend to say now is climate change to make it sound like, well, the climate has changed, but we're not inferring that it's just warming. All right, so important to understand the difference. Natural is good. Natural is the process that we need on Earth, but enhance is when we put more of these gases in artificially, and we're slowing down that rate of heat escape even more. And here's just a little figure that shows that process. So here's some differing perspectives. I'm going to show you both of these. One's from supporters of the human-induced climate change, as in we've done this, we've created this problem as humans. And the other is supporters of climate change as a natural phenomenon, in that supporters of this position assert that this is just a natural cycle and we're just going through a particularly warm period at the moment. So let's have a look.
2000 to 2009. It was the warmest decade on modern record. How do we know? It's what we do. NASA has satellite missions monitoring climate. They're up there right now, gathering data, analyzing trends, and sharing both raw data and results with everyone for free. Why are temperatures rising? Why aren't changes the same everywhere? How are humans contributing to climate change? What changes are already occurring today? Find out for yourself. Our warming world at nasa.gov.
Climate scientists at NASA's Goddard Institute of Space Studies, or GISS, just released a new analysis of global average temperatures, showing that 2009 was tied as the second warmest year ever recorded. And looking just at the southern hemisphere, 2009 even broke the record as the warmest year ever in this half of the world. In fact, 2009 was virtually tied with 5 other recent years in its position as second warmest on record: 1998, 2002, 2003, 2006, and 2007, and it was only a fraction of a percent cooler than the warmest year, 2005. Yet when looking at global temperatures over a longer time frame, these scientists found a persistent warming trend over the past 3 decades, with the average global temperature increasing by roughly 1/3 of a degree Fahrenheit per decade. This past decade, from 2000 to 2009, was the warmest yet. And when looking back all the way to 1880, the year when precise temperature record-keeping began, scientists observed about a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit rise in global temperature.
There are already beginning to be effects of 1 or 2 degrees warming, and if we get 5 or 10 degrees warming several decades downstream, there will be huge effects.
GISS scientists came to these results after analyzing information from 3 sources: data from more than 1,000 weather stations around the globe, satellite observations of sea surface temperature, and measurements from Antarctic research stations. So what's the cause of this long-term warming trend? While there are several natural processes that can cause subtle climate warming or cooling, like variations in solar activity, fluctuations in ocean currents, and volcanic eruptions, climate scientists believe that the rising levels of carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases are the dominant factor driving the rise.
If we want to limit climate change and keep it under an additional 1 degree Celsius or 2 degrees Fahrenheit, we would need to begin to decrease the CO2 emissions gradually so that by the end of the century, CO2 stopped increasing.
So while 2009's temperature may not have been the global record breaker, it is in line with the long-term trend, telling scientists that the planet is getting warmer.
Okay, so now let's have a look at the opposite side of the debate. This one is very different.
Meteorologists are at a loss to explain what is causing this weather.
Are you getting it there, Cameron? Now, what you see is happening now.
There is so much damage. JPA was battered by the largest hailstorm on record.
Many weather experts yesterday slamming
An area in New Delhi, it's snowing. That's a tornado! Yes, a twister in
This is just massive.
light coverage.
There is a wall of water coming towards New York City. Everybody see that?
climate scientists have been embarrassed by the publication of hundreds of private emails and research documents which were stolen by computer hackers. Climate change skeptics have hailed the material as proof that research data has been skewed and suppressed.
Hackers have tried to prove global warming researchers are massaging the figures after stealing sensitive emails from one of the UK's leading climate research centres. The documents were then made available to the public from a Russian server. Well, for more details, let's now cross live to Igor Piskunov.
According to reports, there's more than 1,000 emails which reflect bits of discussions between various scientists throughout several years. But from the information that we've got so far, some of these alleged emails may actually hold the key or actually the clues to prove that the theory of global warming is a huge conspiracy. For example, there's one email coming from one scientist, and in this alleged email, the scientist claims that he had to use additional data in order to hide the decline of global temperatures. So this, of course, if this is true, then this is proof that this could be against a conspiracy. There's another alleged email says that there has been manipulation of data and that this data may not be actually adequate in the scales of global warming because some studies, according to this alleged email, have been done just in several parts of the world, but not in the whole world, so they do not reflect the whole picture.
So I hope you found those really interesting, especially since we've been speaking about media processes and sensationalism. But really, I think the second one in particular, obviously there's a lot of sensationalism there and they're trying to sort of ham it up a little bit. But remember, all those aspects go into making a good story. Now, I'm not saying that I don't believe that human-induced climate change is the side that I would support. I'm not taking a side when teaching this particular unit, but what I am saying is that it's quite interesting when you look at the evidence and the way that it's actually put forward in the media, and I think it's so important that students can see both sides to the debate. So after you have gone through all these particular units in the Science and Decision Making module, you can now go back to that quiz 3, which includes content from this module and also our previous module on science and ethics, because there's a lot of related issues. So when you complete that quiz, remember it covers 2 modules, 3 and 4, and just to keep that in mind and have that information with you when you go to complete that. So here's our 4th portfolio item. Now this one is to do with climate change, we've just been talking about. So when you go on to Learning at Griffith, when you went on to access this PowerPoint mini lecture, you'll also see a resource there, and it's called a Climate Change Science Brief. And there are 2 different media reports of climate change. One brief supports the claim that climate change is a result of anthropogenic factors or human-induced factors, and the other brief provides support for the claim that climate change is a natural process. Now, it's really important that these reports have been specially designed so they have the same data that they've used, but they've interpreted it in different ways. So they have the same evidence, but they have different interpretations of that evidence, and they both have similar amounts of evidence as well. So we've tried to make them really similar with the amount of evidence to present. So I want you to align yourself with one of the claims and develop an argument around about a page and a half to support your position. Now, like any good argument, make sure you refute the other position. So tell me why the other position isn't valid. So you're going to develop an argument. I'd be thinking about all the different components of an argument when you do that. Remember our data and our warrants and our qualifiers. So you may want to go back to that Unit 1 and have a look at those. I also want you to identify an Australian curriculum Science as a Human Endeavour content descriptor and elaboration, which addresses this issue. So you need to go through, and to give you a hint, this is focused on years 7 to 9 roundabout. So have a look in those particular ones and you will find the correct one. And research the internet, and I want you to find one website you could implement in the classroom which addresses this ACARA descriptor and elaboration. So one website, make sure you tell me the name of the website, the hyperlink, and give me a brief description of the website to let me know why that one is a good one. So let's have a look at some examples of previous work. Okay, so here's one, and this one is global warming and impending environmental crisis. Okay, so this person's actually broken up into the actual components of argument to shape her argument. Remember our data, our warrants, our qualifiers, our backings, our counterclaims, to help formulate her argument. All right, she's even included some figures. She's identified an ACARA descriptor. She went to year 10. You can go up to year 10 if you wish. There is a good one in year 10, but there's some other ones in other years as well. And she's given us a website and also listed some others, but just one website. The name of the website would be useful there, and a description. So that one's quite good. Here's another one. This is the global warming myth. So this person supports the natural process. As you can see, very short, not even half a page or maybe half a page. Not a lot of links to the actual components of argument, not obviously a lot of substantial refuting of the other side, no ACARA links, no website links, so quite poor in quality. And finally, another one here. This person lets me know which side they are supporting. Lots of good evidence put in here to support their argument. This one doesn't go by claim, warrant, justification. You don't have to develop your argument there, but it's nice to see the clear identification of the different components within the text. It's very well worded. The ACARA content descriptor is there. Make sure you put the content descriptor and the elaboration. The elaboration's a little dot points afterwards, so make sure you identify the elaboration as well. Here's the particular website that they thought was useful and a nice description, and this one put in a reference list. Look, you don't have to do that for this, but it actually shows that the person went in and actually did a bit more research about it. So if you kind of want to go into that next level of outstanding, that's quite useful. And finally, let's just check our portfolio task sheet. Okay, so here's our portfolio item. It's 7.5 marks and it's all 3 criteria. So we have, to get the highest mark, we have a highly accurate development of argument incorporating all components of argumentation. So what that means is in Unit 1, we talked about claims, warrants, qualifiers, rebuttals, etc. I would like to see evidence of those components in your developed argument. Criteria 2, highly effective, clearly outlined website chosen which accurately aligns with the relevant ACARA descriptor and elaboration. All right. And then critical analysis of provided material, interpretations of evidence presented in an innovative manner, explicit referencing. So yes, include the sites that you visited at the end of your article in addition to identifying that particular website that you're going to describe. But let me know the other sources that you used. I'm not looking for 5+ here. You know how we had 5+ in the early ones? I just want to see that you've done a little bit of outside reading as well. So, but you don't need to do in-text referencing, just pop it at the end. Okay, so that is it for our 4th module. And in the following one, we're going to look at science and technological advances.